Conversations with Niki is brought to you by studyapps.co.za, South Africa's leading education app for tablets. And I'd like to welcome you to Conversations with Niki. My name is Niki Seberini. Thank you very much for tuning in. It's great to be with you. I'd like to welcome our syndication partner listeners. That's Radio Today in Johannesburg. It is Timaning Stereo 89.1, Eldo's FM, Chai FM, Kawi FM, West Coast FM, MC 90.3 FM in Plettenberg Bay, Knysna FM, Wild Coast FM, and Bay FM. Welcome, as I said, to Conversations with Niki, the show where you are entertained, informed and inspired. And we really have a very, very interesting show for you today. But I must just warn you at the outset that we are going to be discussing adult content. So please, if there are any children in the car, in the room where you're listening to the show, please be aware that it is adult content that we are discussing on the show today. We're talking about a book that has been written, and there has been a huge response to this book, really, because I think that the lid has been taken off the proverbial pot, so to speak, and a lot is coming out. A lot of people are opening up and talking about this topic. And what am I talking about? Sex addiction. And you may be wondering to yourself, but what on earth is sex addiction, and how on earth can we measure sex addiction? And what you're going to find out during the show is that sex addiction is like any other addiction that people are suffering from, be it alcohol addiction, be it drug addiction. And I have an expert in the studio, well, the lady who wrote the book and who has actually been counseling for the past 17 years, Joanne Brodie, who's going to be talking about her book. We're going to be looking at all aspects of sex addiction. And then we have two people who've come into the studio, and they're going to be sharing their story. And I just want to start off by welcoming them as well. We have used pseudonyms to protect their identity, and we're just very pleased that they've come on to share their story so that you perhaps can have that connection, or if you know someone who needs that connection, this show is going to be an eye-opener for you, and an ear-opener, and hopefully a mouth opener, so that we can start to converse and communicate about this very interesting topic, and something that more and more people need to be talking about. So Joanne, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Niki. Thank you very much for having me. I'm delighted to be here.
I'm delighted that you are here. And Jabu, Gugu, thank you for coming into the studio as well.
Hi, Niki. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, guys. Thank you so much. So, Joanne, we're going to start off talking to you because you have a very, very interesting past as well. I mean, you come from a great family. Your parents got divorced at a relatively young age. But I think, if I'm, and please do correct me if I'm wrong, by the age of 12, you were a drug addict, weren't you?
Yes, absolutely.
And how did that happen? I mean, what happened in that short space of time?
You know, I was always, I liked the idea, you know, for me it was the end of the 60s in South Africa, and even though, you know, we were living in an oppressed South Africa where things didn't really get in, you know, you must remember this was 1968, and so it was quite appealing, and I tried dope. And although I hated dope and wouldn't really smoke it much again in my life, because it made me depressed, and I could do that all on my own.
Okay.
You know,
you didn't need help?
Yeah, I didn't need help. But I liked the feeling of an altered reality. You know, that was nice. And I always knew, sort of subconsciously, unconsciously, and consciously, really, I think, that I was going to end up an addict. And really, sort of having watched Woodstock and everything else, that was okay for me. Okay. I kind of liked that. It was almost
romanticized.
Yes, it was romanticized, glamorized, and all of that. So it seemed to be a natural kind of thing. But you know, it wasn't where I came from, in the sense I'd been to this sort of Red Hill, which in those days was a very protected school. So I really started rebelling, and very quickly sort of marched on to where I was going to end up, which was a full-blown addict.
And I mean, you got married, You had a child. So was
Yes.
was the addiction, was it something that you were switching on and off, so to speak? Was it under control and then out of control at particular times in your life?
Yes. I mean, I wasn't, funny enough, I didn't really, with all that I've said about my rebelling, I didn't start using, I got addicted to prescription drugs. And didn't really start using street drugs until after I got divorced. But I carried on using prescription drugs. I'd bought into the whole thing. Well, if doctors are giving me medicine, it must be okay. And that was my denial. So yeah, that's how it went.
We're not going to go through the whole story, because
No.
you write all about this incredible story of yours in Women Trashed.
That's right.
And that
yes.
was in 2008. But when did things turn around for you? I mean, you have been counselling for 17 years now. I mean, you're an accredited addictions counsellor.
Yes.
You were head of counselling at Houghton House. You had your own treatment centre. You've been in private practice for 12 years. So you're working your program every
Yes.
single day. But
Yes.
when and how did it turn around for you in such a positive way?
I think I just got to a point over a long time where, after numerous suicide attempts, everything that there's a phrase that's used in the anonymous fellowships, which is said that I got sick and tired of being sick and tired. And but it wasn't like I went into seeking help brimming with love and joy. I really didn't. My back was against the wall, and there was nowhere left to go. My family had really excommunicated me, and I don't blame them. I mean, I put them through absolute hell. And so I went into treatment because I just didn't have any other options. And I think that's how most addicts don't really go there, don't seek help voluntarily as such, because you even though or I knew that I had an addiction problem for the last 10 years kind of thing, I didn't think there was any hope. I didn't think there was, I didn't think I could get well, I didn't think I could do it. And so it was a last resort, when literally, it's like I tend to change when there's nothing
No other
else,
option.
no other option. And I think that for a lot of addicts, that's how we do it. It's like, when there's nothing else to do, that's when I change. And so that's how I went into treatment. And that's okay. It's like, people say addicts have to want to change, but you don't get willing until you're kind of in the program, so to speak, whatever the program is, whether it's treatment, whether it's in an anonymous fellowship, whether it's somewhere. You have to get to some clarity first. And when that happens, something shifts along the way. And then somewhere along the way I became willing. And then it shifted.
That was it.
Yeah. And once it shifted, I was on my way. And thank God, I've never touched drugs again, and it's been over 20 years.
Was it just drugs?
No, it was drugs and, alcohol. I mean, it wasn't my main drug of choice, but it was alcohol, and it was sex and love. I used sex to get my needs met, to feel affirmed, to feel desirable, to feel a lot of things. It wasn't about the sex. It was about a whole bunch of other things. And that's the thing. It's not about the sex per se. It's about how it made me feel. And for me, addiction's not really about the substance or the process it's about either feeling feelings or avoiding feelings. That's for me how I assess addiction.
Okay, I hear you.
So it was also food for me.
Yes.
It was the only thing probably I didn't really get involved in was gambling, which thank goodness. So yeah, it was a lot of things.
I'm sure the audience is listening. I mean, we all know about addiction to drugs and alcohol, as I said, but sex addiction is something that we don't really talk about. And yet you have been counseling people since 1997. Prior to that, were there people that sex addicts could go to talk about this particular addiction? I mean, was it recognized as an addiction?
I think in South Africa, it was certainly overseas, in America and, UK and Europe. But certainly in South Africa, I think it was very difficult, because when I started out, I remembered in 1997, Carte Blanche flighted a program showing Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous in America, an American program. And after the program finished, Derek Watts said, only in America. And the next day I phoned him because I had started Sex and Love Addicts Anonymous in South Africa, and we had been running, there were about 3 or 4 of us, for about a year. And I phoned Derek Watts and said, I phoned Carte Blanche and said, actually you're wrong, you know, there is a local branch of this in South Africa. And in fact they ran a program of us on Carte Blanche to say, okay, fine, they'll eat their words. But that didn't necessarily mean that, and after the program, we were flooded with phone calls from sex addicts in South Africa saying, where can we get help? So although it wasn't recognized, although the medical fraternity didn't recognize it and nobody knew that, you know, sex addiction, what you're talking about, you know, they would say it's not sex addiction, it's something else, and they would put it down to bipolar or ADHD, or because sometimes it can be, you know, as a result of, or one of the symptoms. But, you know, as most a sex addict will know, you know, like if you know, knowing what the symptoms are. So I think it's been very difficult to access help over the years, and even now, you know, as much as, and you know, there are lots of anonymous programs like the AAs or whatever. There are a number of self-help programs, not like when, you know, 20 years ago, but even so, you know, I think it's still quite difficult to access help through the professional channels who may, you know, not recognize it or see it as an
actual addiction. Well, let's talk about sex addiction. I mean, so what is it? I mean, in the book, it's very broad. You talk about, and we'll go to the origins, but you talk about the different types of sex addiction. You talk about prostitution addiction, exhibitionism, voyeurism, secrets of pyramids, a paradise of paraphilias.
That's just a place that I visited.
Okay, very interesting. Frotterism, masturbation addiction, pornography addiction, internet addiction. I said internet addiction, acting in behavior, not having sex, messaging, flirting addiction, codependency, love and relationship addiction.
Because love and relationship addiction, there's love and romance addiction, and then there's relationship addiction, which kind of come under the heading of sex addiction, but they're a little bit apart. Okay. But I included them in the book.
Okay, because you talk about sex and love addicts. Yes. And I'm quite interested how you've brought the two in there. Could you just perhaps expand on that?
Well, you know, like for instance, a love addict is somebody who, you know, when you fall in love and the moon is brighter and moonier, and
the butterflies
everything,
in your stomach,
and all of that is wonderful, and the sun is sunnier and everything. That feeling that you have, you know, like when you're 17 and all that. Although, you know, you have it when you're older as well. Well, a love addict thrives on that feeling, okay, survives on that feeling. And then...
aren't we all love addicts then? I mean, it's a wonderful feeling.
But a love addict, like, has to have that feeling. So when, like, 6 weeks later or 3 weeks later, and the very things that she thought that she loved, or he thought that she loved about that person, then she looks at the person and goes, well, what was I thinking? And then she's off to the next, because she no longer has that feeling. So she needs to have that feeling of being in love.
So it would completely impact on the relationships that she's having. She just cannot go beyond that.
Correct.
The honeymoon phase, so to speak. So she's addicted to that. Okay.
But will use sex also to get her needs met. Okay. So that's the thing.
Okay.
A relationship addict is somebody who will get into relationships, and often abusive relationships, will tell you that they're in an abusive relationship, and you can often give them advice and say, you know, you need to relieve it. Yes. Will leave the relationship, and only to get into another relationship, often as abusive as the one that they've just got.
Abusive as in they're being abused.
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
yes.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a pattern, but that person needs to be in a relationship.
In a relationship where there's drama?
No.
No?
Not necessarily, but it's a pattern.
Okay.
It becomes a pattern. And often it's a pattern going back in their family history, that their mother might have been in an abusive relationship and not being able to stand up to the parent. And often the mother might have been married to somebody who had addiction tendency. So the mother might have been married to an alcoholic or something,
Mm-hmm.
or even a sex addict or
Mm-hmm.
whatever. So that person is a relationship addict. And also, may trade sex for whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's not about the sex, but it's about getting what she thinks are her emotional needs met, which never really gets met. But
using the sex to get there.
Yeah.
And the sex addict?
The sex addict is somebody whose life is very much out of control, and uses sex, who kind of ends up in a whose life is controlled by sex, in the sense that and who does things like tries to limit his or her sexual behavior. Now, normal people don't try to limit their sexual behavior. You know what I mean? It's that they have no need to.
Mm-hmm.
Sex addicts will, their sexual behavior starts to impact on their life, in the sense of it will start to impact on their occupational, on their work life, on their family life, on their
normal functioning.
Their normal functioning.
That's impact.
Yeah.
Okay, so let me ask you this, because you spent time in the book talking about the hormones in the brain.
Yes.
And when you talk about the sex addiction, and this is what I find so interesting, you're talking about the dopamine and all the different hormones which are being affected, and what's happening in the brain during that time.
Yes.
And this is what makes it a biological, a physiological kind of explanation to what happens with a sex addict. Maybe you can expand on that.
Yes, well, this is the thing, with drug addiction, you take a drug, and that's what a drug addict does, and you get high. With sex addiction, it's pretty much the same thing, except you're using your own source of supply. So, what happens is the neurotransmitters, which are the chemical messengers, are being released, and that is the dopamine, or the oxytocin, or the phenylethylamine, or whatever gets released, and this is what makes the person feel the way they do. And this is what we...
Because it's such a when you think about sex, it's such a physical act.
Yes.
And you're talking about, the hormones and what's being secreted in the brain, which is expanding on the feeling, but it's just very interesting.
Yes.
How that works.
Well, I think the thing is that if one wants to, if you know that you're going to, let's say I'm sitting here now and I'm a sex addict, okay, and I'm sitting here looking at you, and in my mind I'm thinking, you know what, I'm going to go and act out tomorrow. Tomorrow I'm going to go and pick up somebody, and we're going to go and act out. Besides the fact that I've been celibate for the last, okay, but let's talk about me. So I'm getting already, so now I've decided that. I'm talking to you, but I've decided that. So I'm having my own little dance in my head, okay, which addicts can do. You see, it's not like drugs, but drug addicts can do it, but okay. So I've decided I'm going to do that, and already what starts to happen is, so I'm sitting here and I start to feel really chilled. Okay, because the messengers in my brain now, because I've made this decision, will start to be released. Okay, because so now I've acted out in my head, in my brain. So I'm feeling really good. So now it's almost...
Doesn't matter that you haven't done it.
Doesn't matter that I haven't done it. In fact, by the time I go and do it, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
The sex actually is immaterial. It's the head, the brain. It's a brain thing. Okay? That's the whole thing. So I'm feeling groovy, actually, because I've acted out in my head. And that's how it works. So at this stage, it doesn't matter. If I was in the program, I'm not going to phone my sponsor.
Because you haven't done anything.
Phone my therapist, because they're not going to be able to talk me out of it. And I don't want to be talked out of it, actually. I'm going to go and act out, okay, because it's already happened in my head.
So, Joanne, we drug addicts, alcoholics, they talk about an addiction being a disease.
Yes.
Right. So a person will say, if I drink a drink, I have, it's almost as if I'm allergic to it, and my body has a reaction to it, and therefore I can become an addict, because the way I respond to alcohol or the way another person responds, that's my understanding based on the research that I've done. How does that then work for sex addicts? If it's all happening in the brain, does that mean there's a lot more that goes on behind what happens with a sex addict? Are we going a lot more into your childhood, growing up? Because you're not having an allergic reaction to a chemical you're putting in your body.
It's not an allergic reaction.
Okay.
It's when an alcoholic drinks a drink, okay, he's not going to stop at one drink. It's an alcoholic who picks up a drink is going to drink the bottle and another one. Okay, that's what happens. It's not an allergic reaction. It's the body, it's the brain going, party time. I remember this. And so
I saw an interview. I saw such an interesting interview with Matthew Perry from Friends, the series Friends, and he was being interviewed on I think a BBC program, and they were talking about being an alcoholic and talking about being a drug addict. Yes, and he turned around and he said, "Well, we're different." He said he almost explained, we have this. I think he may have used the word this allergic reaction, because why can't I stop after one drink, but the person next to me can?
Yeah.
And that's a very interesting way. It turns it around completely, and all over the world people are recognizing it as a disease.
Yes.
So just going back to the question, then how do we compare that addiction to what we see as a disease to the sex addiction?
Well, it's pretty much the same thing. If you first of all, they're different degrees. It's like if you how many drinks does it take to make one person an alcoholic? So how long is a piece of string?
Okay.
How
and
many,
does it matter really?
Okay. How many prostitutes does one have to visit to be a sex addict? It's not about the quantity; it's about the effect of what's happening.
Okay. So let's bring our guests into this conversation, because I think that if we had to ask some of the men to come into the studio right now, and I don't want to say that sex addicts are men, not in any way or form, not at all.
Yes.
But if we had to say it, I mean, you described a sex addict visualizing it, saying, I'm going to be acting on tomorrow, and then all the hormones are being released. If you ask, and I would say especially men, if they meet a woman, a whole lot of them are going to turn around and say, well, then perhaps the first 30 seconds of meeting this woman, maybe they've already undressed her, or maybe they've visualized her in a very intimate way, or whatever it is. And where do we draw a line between a healthy response to someone of the opposite sex, or the same sex, whatever you like or whatever you're attracted to it then going further and becoming that addiction? So I'm going to ask our guys in the studio who are here really to share their story. So Gugu, I'm going to ask you first. I mean, you're sitting here as a recovering sex addict.
Yeah.
And what differentiates you from a hot-blooded male walking through the streets of Joburg and looking at someone that they're attracted to and being sexually attracted?
Thanks, Nikki. Well, basically for me is that the escalation that takes place.
Okay.
So I've been a sex addict since I was 9 years old when I was first exposed to hardcore pornography.
Mm-hmm.
And there it was like this whole, like Joanne is saying, that injection, you know, some kind of injection of something very
Sensation.
powerful. Yeah, like
Yeah.
something in my body physically, and it was like this whole dopamine smash in my brain, basically. And I was sort of engulfed in this feeling of like ecstasy, basically. And since then it has escalated to the point where I'll be driving in my active addiction. I'll be driving and I'm still downloading pictures of porn. You know what I mean? I'll go to work. I'll work for half an hour and then I'll have the urge to go into the bathroom to go download pictures of porn and masturbate. I'll visit a prostitute and I'll see another one half an hour later. And then I'll still go home and sit there for 5 hours downloading porn and masturbating. You know what I mean? So it's like the obsession and the compulsion, and
You can't stop.
the inability to stop, basically. And it's like Joanne is saying, it's not even about the act, it's the lead up to that act with all the rituals and all the
Visualizing
fantasy.
it and
Yeah, it's all in the mind, basically. Yeah, the dopamine. When I found out about the dopamine and all the chemicals happening, then I realized, wait a minute, that's exactly what's been going on for me.
So let's just talk about it. So at 9 years old, you were exposed to hardcore porn.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And when was your first sexual experience?
I was 16 years old, and it was with a sex worker.
So it was with. Okay.
Yeah.
And have you been able to have relationships, normal relationships?
Yeah. That's the thing about it. I mean, I'll still be in a relationship with a woman, and I'll still, in my active addiction, I'll still want to go home and masturbate. I'll have sex, and then I'll still want to masturbate. I'll still want to sit there for 2 hours or 3 hours and look at porn. Like sometimes I'll look at porn for I'll download pictures for 2 hours or 3 hours and not masturbate, because in my head I'm visualizing the ecstasy I'm going to feel when I do masturbate.
It's like what you were saying, Joanne, it's that build-up.
That build-up, yeah, exactly. So I'm trying to sort of string myself along so that it's, in my head I'm thinking, once I do masturbate, I'm going to know everything, and I'm going to experience God, and I'm going to have enlightenment, and it's this build-up in my head of what I'm going to experience. And it never is. It's always shame and the cycle of pain and isolation and secrecy. I think it's the same with, I'm also a drug addict and alcoholic. I think it's the same. It's just that the shame that comes with sex addiction made it much more destructive in my life.
Why do you think there is that shame?
Well, okay, look, it's a risk for us coming here because, you know, if people were to identify us, they'll look at us and say, no, these people who are not informed. They'll say, rapist, child abuser, pedophile, whatever the case is, molester, and all these things. But there are those people in sex addiction fellowships, but it's a very small, let me not say it's a small percentage, let me just say there are a lot of other different types of addicts. People who actually who only recently learned how to masturbate, but they've been sex addicts for a long time. Or people who don't have sex with prostitutes, or people who basically, as one of the fellowships describes it, it's a lust addiction. So the lust is the drug. The other manifestations of it, or the acting out, as they say, is just the symptom, or is just the outcome. The drug is the lust and the chemicals that happen in the brain. Yeah.
As you
that's
were saying,
for me. That's as I understand it.
Okay.
Yeah.
We thank you very much for that. And Jabu, we're going to hear from your point of view in a moment as well. Joanne, I just want to, you know, we're looking at our, I don't know why I always seem to talk about technology, but technology has just enabled people. I mean, you were talking about downloading these, you know, pornography, and now anyone can do it. And I just wonder what impact it's had on sex addiction, the easy access to pornography that's out there, and you know, if just more and more people are jumping on the bandwagon because we just have this kind of access to it. But you'll respond to that after the break. Let's take a break, and we'll continue with our conversation in a moment.
Hi, my name is S.V. Prinsloo. and I'm the HOD of IT Integration at Bridwin Preparatory School in Melrose. We started using study apps about 6 months ago and have seen astonishing results. We were quite amazed to see how quickly the kids have been able to use study apps and the benefits it has shown with regards to reinforcing what they've already learned inside the classroom. I would highly recommend study apps for any school.
Studyapps.co.za. Well, welcome. This is Conversations with Niki, and my name is Niki Seberini. I'd like to welcome our syndication partner listeners, Radio Today in Johannesburg, Timoning Stereo 89.1, Eldo's FM, Kawi FM, Chai FM, West Coast FM, MC 90.3 FM in Plettenberg Bay, Neisner FM, Wild Coast FM, and Bay FM. Hopefully we're keeping you entertained, informed, and inspired week after week. Do remember to visit the website, www.conversationswithniki.co.za, one word, Niki spelled Niki. So if you've missed any shows in the past, or if you're missing part of this conversation, we will be podcasting it within the next 2 days. I must warn you that we are discussing adult content, so please you have been warned. If there are any children in the room or listening to the show, either switch it off and listen later or ask them to please leave the room, because we're talking about a really very important and a very serious topic, and that is sex addiction. And I have Joanne Brodie in the studio, who's just written a book called People Who Are Addicted to Sex, and I have 2 people who've come onto the show to share their stories, and and we're just very pleased that they're doing it. It takes a lot of bravery to come in and to talk about a sex addiction, and that is Jabu and Gugu. So thanks, guys. Thanks everyone for coming in. Gugu, you were talking about being exposed to hardcore porn when you were 9 years old. You were talking about your addiction. Before we get to you, Jabu, and we hear your story, and off air, you said something very important, and you said the impact that kind of exposure can have on a child, and what happens when you're younger.
Yes.
Do you want to expand on what you mean?
Yes, because I was listening to Gugu, and I just thought, it's because if you think of a child at 9, children at 9 are little. But having said that, I think that the average age that children today are exposed to pornography is 9 to 11. And at that age, one is not able to process that kind of material. I don't think actually, I'm wondering what age one is able to, but certainly at that age. And I think that it has a devastating impact. I mean, I've seen clients who, by the time they get to age 19 with the technology and what they've been exposed to, they're just absolutely finished. They're incapable of even having an erection, and they have to then be debriefed almost on the kind of pornography that they've seen. I mean, they've seen it all. They've seen it all. They've done it all. In terms of, you were saying, in terms of the technology.
Yes. Yeah.
And the impact has just been devastating, because and often, in those kind of situations, what they've been exposed to, hardcore can cover a lot, but it covers things, and the things fall out their mouths, like, oh no, yeah, well, I've seen bestiality and incest and this, and then I decided to go into this, and it's just unbelievable, and it's said in a very deadpan face, and they've become completely desensitized, so.
And it's a worry. It's a worry. Once again,
worry.
with the technology, I did a show a while ago about young children being exposed because of technology. So we need to talk about that. And I also want to talk about abuse in a moment. But Jabu, let's bring you in, because I want to hear your story. Just for you, I mean, when did you become aware that sex had become an addictive part of your life?
I think probably when I was in my mid-20s, because I'd actually found that there was one day that I spent in particular where I spent the whole day looking at porn and masturbating, and I did nothing else besides that. I remember that I had some other things that I had to do that day though as well. And when I looked back, I think it was the very next day, I looked back and I was just going through my day, and I realized, my word, how much time did I actually spend on doing, on looking at porn, you know? And it was quite unrattling at that point in time.
But why did that happen? I mean, why did you spend one day? So up until that point, had you been exposed to pornography?
Yes, I mean, like I started when I was 14 years old. So I mean, like it was something that I did, but I mean, for me, I thought it was a normal thing to do. I mean, like all my friends were doing it though as well, and I mean, like it didn't really faze me as something that it was a problem for me. But then I found that because I mean I was also an alcoholic at that time. Well, I started drinking when I was especially when I was 18 years old. I started drinking every day, and what had happened was that I had failed varsity. I was sitting at home. I was trying to help my parents also do a couple of things here and there. So I mean, like basically, I mean, like I was at home. Not really having a plan for the future. I mean, not knowing where I was going, and none of those things. So I think what happened was that especially my porn addiction just escalated at that point in time.
Because you had all this time on your hands.
Yeah, I had all this time on my hands. Yeah.
So when you look back and you thought, my goodness, I spent an entire day doing that. Did you think, oh well, I mustn't do that again? Or was it, what was it? Did you think, oh well, the feelings were so fantastic, and I wonder when I'm going to have another chance to spend an entire day doing that?
You know, I do remember feeling a lot of shame and guilt when I was looking back at that, and I told myself, you know what, I'm never going to do this again. I can't do this again. You know, it seemed very unproductive at that point in time. But the fact of the matter was that I couldn't stop. You know, and I mean, I've had many other days after that where I just spent the whole day looking at porn, masturbating, and yeah.
And when did you feel that it was something that was really interfering in your life, and it was something that you had to stop or at least try and control?
You know, I think in 2010. I remember then, because what happened was that I actually tried to commit suicide that year because of the porn addiction and because of the alcoholism there as well. So I think that was really, it was sort of like, I mean, like it got into a point where it was just so difficult to actually think that I could actually come out of this thing. You know? So I thought that the only way to come out of it was actually to kill myself.
And did you attempt?
Yes, I did attempt to.
And how did that shift for you? I mean, that's a low place to be, you know.
I mean, like the way how I think about it now is that I wasn't ready or willing to try something different. I mean, like for me, it was all about myself solving my own problems.
Right.
So I thought that maybe, okay, fine, maybe things were going to change. I did speak to my parents about it. I spoke to my uncles and so on and so forth about it. I went into treatment. Well, I went to see a psychologist though as well. But nothing actually really changed. And in fact, I found myself very quickly after that doing exactly the same things that I was doing. So I mean, like I wasn't. I mean, even though it was a low point in my life, I believe that I still needed to come to even a lower point. Yeah. So that I could
the rock bottom.
Yeah.
So what was your rock bottom?
My rock bottom it came in 2011, where I'd gone back once again. I mean, after a period of sobriety, I think it was like 1 month or 2 months, I'd gone back again.
And sorry, what is sobriety for you? No pornography, no prostitutes?
Yeah, so I mean, like at that time, it was just the pornography and the masturbation, and then also drinking though as well. I'd cut out the drinking for that short period of time.
Okay.
And yeah, I told myself, you know what, this is it. I'm never ever going to do this thing again. You know, I'll never go back. And then within 2 months, I was doing exactly the same thing, and I'd lost all hope. I thought that I was going to die, especially an alcoholic. I thought that I was going to die looking at porn, and I wasn't going to be able to change my behavior at all. And that was really, I mean, like I felt at that point in time, I really did feel powerless. You know, I felt powerless over my addiction.
And how did that change for you?
Interestingly enough, what happened was that I was actually forced to go into treatment 3 weeks after I'd relapsed. and the person that was giving me the assessment actually asked me whether it is that I wanted to go into treatment. And I think at that point in time, I actually had enough willingness to say, yes, I do want to be in treatment. If I never had said that, I don't believe that I would have been in treatment. I don't believe that I would have been here at all. So yeah, I think it was. I think it was definitely an intervention of some sort, an intervention higher than myself, that actually put me in that situation.
What a story. And you in your book, a lot of the people that you're counseling, because you talk about the different type of addiction, and then you have almost a case study. So you're talking about someone who I presume, they were okay with you talking about their stories in the book.
Niki, let me just clarify. I changed not only everyone's names, but I changed all the circumstances.
Okay.
So, it's almost fiction in its own way.
Based on all the different stories. What I found interesting, and I'm going to ask my two guests just now, and it really is very personal. Is there was a lot of abuse. There was a lot of childhood abuse,
yes,
which I found so unsettling and so disconcerting, and it just seemed to be something that you would sit with people and it just seemed to come out, and a lot of times people had forgotten about it, but through the counseling it seemed to come out. Do you find that many of these addicts had some type of abuse as a child?
Well, it's a well-known, it's well documented that with sex addiction, there are high, the figures are high for sexual abuse, physical abuse, and emotional abuse. It is well documented.
Okay, so I presume, guys, in the whole healing process, you sometimes have to go to those places that maybe you don't want to. Gugu, for you?
I wasn't sexually abused, but I feel, looking back, that I felt that I was emotionally abused, and to an extent physically abused, like getting beaten. But for a long time I thought, everyone gets shouted at, everyone gets hit, you know what I mean? But it's just the way that I took it, and I was a very sensitive child. So for me, I found comfort in these things that came my way, which were porn and alcohol later on, and drugs when I went to varsity. So now what I'm doing is I'm unpacking all that in what they call step work, which is sort of personal development and sort of facing my demons, so to speak. And I'm coming to terms with what happened in my life, and I think one thing that's helping is to learn to forgive those situations that happened to me, that I might have blamed through my active addiction. I might have blamed on my circumstances. I could really relate to what Joanne and Jabu were saying about the willingness. I didn't have willingness to get clean and to come into recovery. 6 months clean from drugs and alcohol and acting out with other people. But I'm still about 40 days clean of pornography and masturbation. But it's a big step. It's a big step.
You're working on it every day.
Yeah, every
day.
day.
You're working on.
Every day I commit to my recovery and taking responsibility for my recovery.
So I've heard of this what do you call it? A dry alcoholic, or a recovering where you just give up.
A
dry drunk. But you actually have to, you talk about the program, the 12 steps, you actually have to work it.
Yeah.
You have to dig deep. You have to make huge changes in order to shift.
Look, I'm 6 months clean right now. In 2012 I was 8 months clean, but I feel better now than I did then because of the work that I'm doing. Then I was not.
You mean you've gone deeper?
I've gone much deeper. Then I was not being honest with myself.
Okay.
I was just hanging on. I was just really hanging on with the tips of my fingertips. But now it's so easy, so to speak, because I'm doing the work, and I'm not looking at the main problems now. I'm working on different problems. I've got, as I say, higher quality of problems that I need to face. I'm dealing with smaller things that I never realized I had in my active addiction. So that's a blessing. You know?
Okay. And for you, Jabu, going deep, going back to when you were younger, or how you've been with people or people with you, how's that process been for you?
It has been a very enlightening process for me. One thing that I didn't realize about myself was how much it is that I actually depended on people to actually make me feel good about myself. You know, so I mean, like I was just thinking just now. I mean, like my earliest memory, in fact, in life is actually of rejection, though. It's actually of my mother rejecting me, and it seems like throughout my life I was looking for that affirmation from other people. And I mean, I went about it in all the wrong ways, you know. And I mean, it's been well, on my side, it's been very destructive to me, though, as well, and also in the process of I've hurt people, though, as well. So, but I mean, like as I've worked through these things, and I am still working through these things. Yeah, it has been very, very enlightening. It has helped me out. It's helped me to see my own behavior, especially now, though, as well. And it's helped me to see where it is that I can actually change my behavior and actually do things better, so that it is that I can actually enjoy a full life, so to speak.
I'm just wondering how one works through rejection. So you've got to obviously forgive the person where you think it all started.
Yes.
But trying to approach each relationship that you have, whatever relationship it is, having the trust and being able to, I suppose, just know that they're not going to reject you. Wow, it's something that you obviously have to be really working on quite actively all the time.
Yes, yeah, no, definitely so. I mean, like an idea that a friend was actually relaying to me the other day was that other people are actually not responsible for the way how I feel. Right? My feelings actually arise up within myself. So if it is that I do feel rejected, it's actually me who is sort of coming from a place of demanding from that other person to make me feel validated, if that makes any kind of sense. So I need to recognize these feelings within myself. I need to recognize, okay, I am getting rejected. It is not their responsibility to affirm me. I actually need to find that affirmation from somewhere else. And the way how he was also saying was that, I mean, I need to find these things from a higher power, in fact, or these feelings of affirmation need to come up from within me, and I need to be practicing that on a daily basis.
So how do you do that, though? I mean, how do you do that when you meet someone and you've got all of these thoughts going through your head and you want to try and relate in a normal way, but you want to be conscious? That's tough.
Well, I mean, for me, what I do is that I actually affirm myself. Actually, I mean, like for me, affirming myself has been a very, very important aspect of my life leading up, being in recovery. And I mean, just like telling myself positive things, like waking up in the morning and telling myself that I'm actually a good person. I'm not a bad person. Telling myself that I do have confidence, for example. And all of these things actually just help me throughout the day. So when it is that I do meet people and I do recognize that, I am looking for affirmation from them.
Yeah.
I recognize that, and then I come in like with an affirmation in my mind. So
okay.
That's how I deal with it.
Okay. So Gugu, so you spoke about being clean for 6 months and then 40 days without acting
pornography
with pornography. Okay.
Yeah.
So now let me ask you this question. For an alcoholic, for an addict, and a drug addict, and you're recovering from both of them, it's something that you can eliminate from your world.
Yeah.
We spoke, Joanne, a little bit earlier about being a food addict. A food addict, you've got to face food every single day because you have to sustain yourself. Now, what about relationships for you guys? You meet someone, right?
Yeah.
And you want to then take the relationship to the next level, and you want to get intimate, and you're having an emotional relationship, and then you're going to have a physical relationship. I cannot imagine how difficult that must be, and where these blurred lines are. How do you know when it's a normal, healthy relationship or when this is your addiction acting out?
I went to a workshop recently. It's one of the 12-step fellowships. There are, as far as I know, there are about 5 S fellowships, which are sex for sex addicts, and then there's prostitution addicts, people who are sex workers anonymous. So this workshop that I went to. This was the most strictest, let me say, definition of sobriety. They have the strictest definition of sobriety. I'm currently a member of another S fellowship, which has a more flexible definition of sobriety. So their definition is that no sex outside of marriage, even with yourself, so no masturbation, and no sex outside of marriage, and that's the starting point.
And if you're not married?
If you're not married, you're acting out. You're not sober.
Okay.
If you're having sex outside of marriage. And it's quite controversial with them as well, because they'll say between a man and a woman. So it takes all the same-sex attracted people out of the question. So and they say that's the starting point. Their goal is to have zero lust in the brain. And the way the guy described it was the difference between love and lust. Love, any sex that is in love, that comes from a place of love, creates connection and brings togetherness, and it's a nurturing experience. Any sex, even with your wife or your husband, that comes from a place of lust is divisive. So it creates division between the two people. It's sort of detached. I mean, I might be making love to my wife, but then my mind is somewhere else. I'm thinking about someone I saw earlier that day, one of the porn images, and in a sense, your partner might be able to sense that because there's no connection. So for me, that's sort of my understanding. The other S fellowship that I'm a member of, they have what they call the circles. So the inner, middle, and outer circle. So the inner circle is the major problem areas like pornography, prostitution, and so on. And then the middle circle is the more gray areas, like you're driving and you're looking at the lady walking down the street. You're taking the second look, the third look, and that's sort of ogling and looking at magazines, lingerie section. That could also be inner circle for some people. So it's a lot more flexible, and it allows for being gentle with yourself, basically. You know, so you're not beating yourself up all the time every time you have a sexual thought. So
what works for you, though? I mean, do you see yourself getting into a relationship and finding a balance between the lust and the love?
I pray about it. So that's what I pray about, is that I'm able to move towards a loving sexual expression. So right now, being so new and so fresh and still going through withdrawals from the pornography, right now I know that it wouldn't be a safe place for me to try to be sexual in a relationship. But I'm not thinking about tomorrow. As they say, one day at a time. Today I know that what I need to do is work my program, and you know, when my higher power, so to speak, puts me in that situation, or you know, puts a relationship in front of me, I just have faith that I'll be able to handle it. You know, because I do have a program.
You really have to be willing. You have to be willing. So Jabu, and for you, I mean, asking you that question about having the relationship and becoming physical with someone that you're attracted to. Have you thought about that?
Well, I mean, like, the process that I have undergone was that I first needed to get myself right before I actually even started thinking about those things, because as I've been mentioning, I mean, like, there's this dependence on other people, which is extremely unhealthy, especially for me though as well. So I mean, like, I've had to deal with such things as resentments, with the hurt and the pain of the past, you know, with the issues that I had with my parents and so on and so forth. And I needed to come to a place of wholeness before it is that I could actually start engaging in or start thinking about relationships. And another thing that I've also realized is that it's also important the type of person that I do meet, because there are also, I mean, like, Joanne was speaking about love addicts out there though as well, you know, and I need to be careful in terms of who it is that I meet. I can't meet somebody that is also dependent, who also has issues on that end. I need to be looking for healthy individuals in which I can then engage in on that kind of a level. Yeah, but I mean, like, I haven't gotten there yet. I'm still undergoing the process. But yeah, I mean, like, we will see where it goes from here.
See where it goes. Would you tell your partner, if you eventually meet someone, that you are a recovering sex addict?
Yes, I believe in complete disclosure. I mean, like, honesty for me is extremely important. If it is that I start becoming dishonest, then it is that I open up the door to go back where I don't want to be. You know?
And for you, Gugu?
Yeah, definitely. It's a question of intimacy again.
Yeah.
So I'd like to find someone who I feel so comfortable with that I'm able to open up about myself completely.
Okay.
Because in that way I don't have secrets, and they say addiction thrives in the dark. So you know, I want to be completely open and not have any secrets, and feel that I can, because that's another person that you can turn to for support, and that should be the person that you look for support.
Sure.
If it's someone I'm trying to protect her feelings and this and that, I'm hiding things, then what's to stop me from having a drink or hiding a session on the internet, you know? So yeah, definitely I agree with Jabu about full disclosure. Yeah.
Thanks for that. Joanne, you've heard that. We, as I said, giving up alcohol, giving up drugs, you know, it's something that I'm not saying it's easy in any way or form, but you don't have to face alcohol and drugs during your everyday life or interacting with other people. So what do you tell people when you counsel them, if they ask you that question?
For me, I mean, I've listened with great interest to Gugu and Jabu, and I think that what they're doing is correct, and I love what they've had to say, actually. It's been an eye-opener for me. What I tell my clients is, you know, for me, when you stop using, when you stop acting out, I think one has to go through kind of a purification process. You can't go from unhealthy to healthy just like that. It doesn't work like that. As they've said, you know, you can't, because actually then you're going to meet someone probably just as unhealthy as you've been, because your energy is going to attract the same kind of energy. It's very likely. So I think one has to go through a process of like nothingness. And although you know, when Gugu was describing the 1S Anonymous program that sort of was quite rigid, I personally think that for a time one should go through like a period of celibacy, so that one can work on one's own sexual issues and find out who you really are. So that's what I suggest, for a time, only for a time, and for each person it's different. It could be 6 months, a year, longer sometimes. It depends on each person. It depends what the baggage is, and only then kind of engage in whatever you know, the because I think when one has, okay, your problem was this, but you can still engage with this, it becomes confusing. But that's been my experience, and everybody is so unique and different. And whatever works for people, that's how it should be. But that's what I advise.
In your book, as I said, you have divided it up, so you have the prostitute, addict, the exhibitionist, voyeurism, etc., etc.
Yes.
And then in part 2, you talk about recovering from voyeurism, a prescription for prostitution addiction, healing frotterism, handling masturbation addiction. Okay. Now, with Jabu and Gugu, we spoke about addiction to pornography and masturbation, and I know that in the information you gave me, prostitution as well. Is there a different approach, though, if you're talking to a person who's addicted to voyeurism, watching other people, or frotterism and all these other things? Are there different ways that you approach it?
In a sense, like somebody who's a frotterism addict.
And what is frotterism?
Frotterism is somebody who likes to touch other people without their permission. So they like to go to, for example, a place like Woolies on a day of a big sale, and then they'll go up, pretend to be, like, let's say I'm looking at the clothes on, you know, when they've got those big hangers, things, racks,
lots of crowds,
lots of crowds, and they pretend, they come up behind you and they pretend to be looking at the same thing, and then they bump into you, but like their penis will come up against you, and you kind of look around, but you can't be sure that it wasn't an accident, you know. That's what they do, and they get very aroused by that. And then they'll go home that night, and they'll fantasize about this whole, and masturbate. And they can fantasize on that for days and weeks, you know. And that's what they do.
So it's different. It's basically reading the book and it's handling each kind of addiction within within the sexual addiction umbrella slightly differently.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So it's about, some people have to stop doing certain things in order to get well.
Okay.
So it's tailor-made for each person.
I hear you. Well, I think that they need to read the book. I think it's very important. People who are addicted to sex, and that's written by Joanne Brodie. And guys, I mean, you know, I think coming into the studio today and sharing your story, I just thank you so much. And I think there's so many people who are listening that have just connected with what you've said and maybe are thinking to themselves or have been, am I an addict? Or, oh, no, I'm not. Or, but at least we've had the conversation and we've started that conversation. So, Gugu, Jabu, thank you. Thank you for coming into the studio and for sharing.
Thanks, Niki.
And wishing you all the best with this recovery, really.
Thanks. Thank you.
And Joanne, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful.
And I want to thank Jabu and Gugu so much because I loved what you guys had to say. Thank you.
Absolutely. And thank you for tuning in. I hope that you found it informative and enlightening, and you know, that maybe connections were made and a conversation has started, and that's what we want here. So thank you for tuning in. I look forward to being with you same time next week. So from me, Niki Seberini, take care of yourself. Goodbye. Conversations with Niki was brought to you by studyapps.co.za, South Africa's leading education app for tablets.